The sound of clinking glasses and polite laughter filled the grand hall of the Viridian Hotel. From the outside, it was a perfect evening, a celebration of yet another successful business merger. David Lancaster stood near the bar, his fingers lightly tapping against his whiskey glass. His eyes scanned the room, catching glimpses of the life he had built: power, wealth, respect. But behind the carefully constructed facade, something darker lurked. The whispers had started weeks ago. Small, subtle inconsistencies in schedules, sudden late meetings, changes in demeanor. He had always trusted Lauren, his wife of 10 years, implicitly. She had been with him before the success, before the empire. But doubt, once planted, grew like a cancer. Tonight, he watched her from across the room, her laughter effortless, her hand resting lightly on the arm of Charles Whitmore, David's business partner and closest friend. A flicker of something in Lauren's eyes, guilt, amusement, sent an unease creeping up David's spine. He took a slow sip of his drink, forcing himself to remain composed. The pieces were not yet fully formed, but the picture was coming into focus. Later that night, in the quiet of their penthouse, David tested the waters. "You and Charles seem to be having a good time tonight," he said casually, pulling off his tie. Lauren, already in bed, didn't look up from her phone. "We were just reminiscing. He was telling me about his upcoming trip to London. Business, of course." "Ah, business." The pause in his voice made her glance up. "David, is something wrong?" He hesitated. He could let it go, dismiss the feeling as paranoia. But something told him to press. "Are you happy?" She frowned, sitting up slightly. "What kind of question is that?" "A real one." She sighed, setting her phone down. "Of course I am. We have everything we ever wanted. Everything." The word felt hollow. As he climbed into bed beside her, she kissed him softly, as if to erase whatever doubts lingered. He kissed her back, but his mind was elsewhere. Something was wrong. He just had to prove it. The next morning, David arrived at his office earlier than usual. The city was still waking up, the streets humming with early commuters. As he sat behind his desk, he opened his laptop and began digging. If there was something to find, he would find it. Emails, calendar records, financial transactions, every keystroke, every interaction left a trace, and David had spent his career following those traces. But Lauren was careful. Too careful. And so was Charles. An encrypted email caught his eye, sent from Charles's personal account to an address he didn't recognize. He frowned, clicking it open. Most of the text was meaningless, coded perhaps, but at the bottom a single line stood out. "London is still on. She'll meet me there. Same plan." The blood drained from David's face. His grip tightened on the mouse. London. His wife wasn't just reminiscing with Charles last night. She was making plans with him. David sat in his home office, staring at the screen of his laptop, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. The glow of the monitor was the only source of light in the dimly lit room. His whiskey glass, half empty, rested on the mahogany desk beside him, the ice cubes melting into the amber liquid. He hadn't slept much in the past few days, not since the nagging feeling first took root in his mind. At first he had dismissed it as paranoia. Emily had always been affectionate, and their marriage had seen its fair share of ups and downs. But lately, something felt off. The way she smiled at him felt rehearsed. Her touch lacked warmth. There were the late-night phone calls she always seemed eager to end, the scent of a different cologne lingering on her clothes. And then, there were the messages, short, cryptic, but too frequent to ignore. He wanted to trust her. He wanted to believe that the life they had built was real, unshaken by lies. But the evidence, though circumstantial, was mounting. The final straw came earlier that day. Emily had been in the shower when a message flashed across her phone, which lay on the nightstand. David wasn't usually one to pry, but his gut instinct overpowered his morals. He picked up the phone, his pulse racing. The message read, "Same time tomorrow? I miss you." David felt like the ground beneath him had cracked open. The sender's name was hidden under a simple initial, T. It didn't take a genius to put the pieces together. Thomas, David's oldest friend, his business partner, a man he trusted with his life. A sickening weight settled in his chest as he placed the phone back exactly where it had been. Emily stepped out of the bathroom moments later, her wet hair cascading down her shoulders. She smiled at him, the same smile she had always given him before, but now, all he could see was the lie behind it. The next morning, David made a decision. He needed the truth, and he needed it fast. He wasn't about to confront Emily without proof, and he certainly wasn't going to accuse Thomas without knowing exactly what was happening. He made a call to an old acquaintance, Martin Hale, a former police detective turned private investigator. They met at a quiet cafe on the outskirts of the city. Hale was a man of few words, with sharp eyes that had seen more betrayal than David could imagine. He flipped open a small notepad as David explained the situation. "You need me to confirm if your wife is cheating," Hale said, tapping his pen against the paper. David exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. "I need to know who she's with, and I need proof." Hale studied him for a moment before nodding. "I'll handle it. If there's something to find, I'll find it." David left the cafe feeling a strange mix of dread and relief. The wheels were in motion now. Whatever truth lay ahead, he would face it. Days passed, each one dragging slower than the last. David became more observant, scrutinizing Emily's every move. She remained careful, composed, but he noticed the cracks. She laughed a little too hard at his jokes, as if overcompensating. She kissed him goodbye in the mornings, but there was a slight hesitation now, as though she was going through the motions. Then, finally, the message came. It was from Hale. "Got something. We need to meet." David's heart pounded as he drove to the meeting spot, a quiet parking lot just outside the city. Hale was already there, leaning against his car. He handed David a manila folder without a word. David opened it with trembling hands. Photographs, Emily and Thomas, together, at a hotel, holding hands, laughing, kissing. David's stomach churned. His worst fears weren't just suspicions anymore. They were reality. "I'm sorry," Hale said, his voice devoid of the usual detachment. "This isn't just a fling. It's been going on for months." David shut the folder, his grip tightening around the edges. He had always envisioned his life as one built on trust, on the foundation of years spent with the people he loved. But now, it all felt like an illusion. He sat in his car for a long time after Hale left, staring at the photographs in his lap. He could feel his hands shaking, his pulse hammering in his ears. But there was no sadness, not anymore. Only cold, seething rage. They thought they could betray him and walk away unscathed. They were wrong. David didn't go home that night. Instead, he drove aimlessly through the city, his mind a storm of rage and disbelief. The photographs lay on the passenger seat, their presence a constant reminder of the betrayal. He had suspected, but seeing it confirmed, seeing Emily with Thomas, was like a knife twisting in his gut. At some point, he parked by the waterfront, staring at the reflection of city lights on the dark water. He had built his life around trust, around loyalty. He had poured his soul into his marriage, into his company, into his friendship with Thomas. And now, it had all been reduced to a cruel joke. The thought of confronting them crossed his mind 100 times that night, storming into their secret world, tearing apart the lies with nothing but fury. But fury wasn't enough. If he wanted to destroy them, he needed to be smarter. By the time the sun rose, David had made his decision. He wouldn't just expose them. he would take everything from them. David returned home in the early morning, his face carefully composed as he stepped inside. Emily was in the kitchen, dressed in one of his shirts, humming softly as she made coffee. She looked up and smiled when she saw him. "There you are," she said, setting down her cup. "I was worried. You didn't answer my calls." "Busy night," David replied, forcing a tired smile. "Business stuff." Emily's eyes flickered with something. Relief, perhaps. Did she think he was oblivious? That he was too busy with his company to notice the cracks forming around him? She walked over and placed a hand on his chest, looking up at him with the same affectionate gaze she had given him for years. "You work too hard," she murmured. David's stomach churned. How long had she been doing this? How many times had she lied to his face, kissed him with another man's touch, still lingering on her lips? But he didn't react. He couldn't. Not yet. "I know," he said, kissing her forehead. "I promise, I'll slow down soon." And he meant it, because soon there wouldn't be anything left for her to take from him. The first step was securing his company. David had built his business from the ground up, with Thomas by his side. They had trusted each other implicitly, until now. But trust was a fragile thing, and David knew just how to dismantle it. He spent the next few days carefully going through company records, financial statements, contracts, anything that could be used against Thomas. He already knew his partner had been making questionable decisions, risky investments that David had cautioned against. Now, he would use those mistakes to his advantage. Late one night, he called Martin Hale again. "I need more than just proof of an affair," David said. "I need something that will ruin him." Hale was silent for a moment. Then, "Understood. I'll dig deeper." It didn't take long. Within days, Hale uncovered exactly what David needed: evidence of fraud. Thomas had been siphoning money from the company, hiding it in offshore accounts. It was subtle enough that it had gone unnoticed for years. But now, with the right eyes on it, the theft was undeniable. David stared at the files Hale had sent him, his grip tightening around his phone. Thomas hadn't just betrayed him personally. He had stolen from him. This wasn't just an affair anymore. This was war. The next phase of David's plan required patience. He had to play his part, the loving husband, the trusting business partner, until the time was right. At home, he showered Emily with affection. He took her out to dinner, held her hand, whispered promises about their future. And all the while, he watched her. At work, he continued meetings with Thomas as if nothing had changed. He listened to his partner's ideas, nodded along, even laughed at his jokes. But deep down, every word Thomas spoke only fueled David's determination. Then came the final move. David arranged a board meeting, one that Thomas didn't see coming. As the executives took their seats in the sleek, glass-walled conference room, Thomas walked in with his usual confidence, until he saw David's expression. Something in David's eyes made him pause. The meeting began, and David didn't waste time. He presented the financial records, the proof of embezzlement. Gasps filled the room as the numbers flashed on the screen. Thomas turned pale. "David, this is a misunderstanding." David leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "Is it?" he asked coolly. "Because it looks like you've been stealing from your own company for years." The board members murmured, their expressions shifting from shock to anger. David tilted his head. "And if that's the case, then you're no longer fit to be part of this company." Security entered the room. Thomas barely had time to protest before he was escorted out. One enemy down. One left to go. That night, David returned home to find Emily waiting for him in the living room, a glass of wine in hand. "How was your day?" she asked, her tone casual. David smiled. "Eventful." She laughed, completely unaware that her lover had just been destroyed, that soon she would be next. David poured himself a drink and sat across from her, watching as she sipped her wine, completely at ease. Enjoy this moment, Emily, he thought, because soon your perfect little world will come crashing down. Emily's betrayal was a slow poison, but David had no intention of letting it kill him. He had already dealt with Thomas, removing him from the company with precision. Now, it was time for his wife to face the consequences of her actions. But Emily was different. She wasn't just a business partner or an old friend. She was the woman he had once loved, the mother of his child, and for that reason, her punishment had to be personal. David started small, subtle changes in his behavior. Little things she wouldn't immediately notice, but would slowly start to feel. He stopped being predictable. Some nights he came home late without explanation. Other times he left early in the morning before she woke up. He no longer sent her affectionate texts during the day, no longer kissed her goodbye with the same warmth. He was there, but he wasn't really there. Emily noticed. "Is something wrong?" she asked one evening as they sat at the dinner table. Their son was upstairs, and the house was quiet. David glanced at her over his wine glass. "Why do you ask?" She hesitated. "You've been distant." He smiled, setting his glass down. "Maybe I've just been busy. You know how it is." A flicker of uncertainty crossed her face. She didn't push further, but he could see the questions forming in her mind. Good. Let her wonder. Let her doubt. The next phase required something more direct. David had been patient, but now it was time to set the stage for her downfall. He arranged for an anonymous message to be sent to Emily's phone, one he had carefully crafted himself. It was from a concerned friend, warning her that David knew everything. The moment she received it, he saw the change in her. She became nervous, constantly checking her phone, sneaking anxious glances at him when she thought he wasn't looking. That evening, she tried to act normal, but David saw the tension in her movements. "David," she said carefully, setting her fork down, "are we okay?" He took a slow sip of his drink before responding. "Why wouldn't we be?" Emily searched his face, trying to read him. She was afraid. Not because she loved him, but because she feared what he might do. The final act of his revenge had to be public. One evening, he invited friends and business associates over for a dinner party. It was a carefully curated guest list, people who mattered, people whose opinions Emily valued. The evening began smoothly, laughter and conversation filling the house. Emily played the perfect hostess, smiling and charming their guests. And then, at just the right moment, David stood and raised his glass. "I'd like to make a toast," he said, his voice calm, controlled. The room quieted, all eyes on him. He turned to Emily. "To my beautiful wife," he said, "the woman who stood by my side through everything, the woman who gave me a family." Emily smiled, but there was unease in her eyes. David continued. "Marriage, as we all know, is built on trust. And trust is a fragile thing, isn't it?" He paused, letting his words sink in. Then he pulled out his phone. "Which is why I think it's only fair to share something eye-opening." He tapped the screen. A projector behind him flickered to life, displaying the damning photos of Emily and Thomas. Clear, undeniable evidence of their affair. Gasps echoed through the room. Emily's face turned white. "David," she whispered, her voice shaking. He turned to face her fully. "How long, Emily?" His voice was dangerously soft. "How long have you been lying to me?" She opened her mouth, but no words came. There was nothing she could say. The guests looked on, some whispering, others simply staring. David stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You had everything, Emily. A life most people could only dream of. And you threw it away for what? A man who no longer has anything?" Tears welled in her eyes. I didn't." "You did." Silence stretched between them. And then, without another word, David turned and walked away, leaving her standing there, exposed, humiliated, alone. The house of cards had finally collapsed. That night, David packed his bags. Emily tried to stop him. "Please, David, let's talk." "There's nothing left to talk about," she sobbed, begging, pleading. But it was too late. She had made her choice. David left without looking back. And as he walked away, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Relief. David had walked away from Emily, but the war wasn't over. His revenge had been precise, calculated. But he knew that true closure wouldn't come from humiliating her in front of their friends. It would come from ensuring she lost everything, just as she had taken everything from him. He had been a man who built empires, who turned small opportunities into massive successes. And now, for the first time, he realized that his greatest battle wasn't in the boardroom. It was in his own home. And he intended to win. The divorce papers. It took only a week before Emily reached out. She was desperate, calling, texting, begging him to meet. But David wasn't interested in talking. He had already spoken to his lawyer, and within days, Emily received the official divorce papers. The terms were brutal. David had ensured that Emily would leave the marriage with nothing but personal assets. No stake in the company, no access to his wealth, and, most importantly, no custody of their son. She fought back. "This is insane," she spat when they finally met in their lawyer's office. "You're trying to erase me from your life." He met her furious gaze with cold detachment. "Aren't you the one who did that first?" Emily flinched but recovered quickly. "David, please. We have a child together. We have a life." "You had a life," he corrected. "And you threw it away." Her hands trembled as she held the papers. "You can't just take my son from me." David leaned in, voice low and firm. "Watch me." The custody battle. David had been strategic. He had gathered every possible piece of evidence, every witness, every resource, to prove that Emily was an unfit mother. The affair alone was damaging, but David had also uncovered a financial paper trail. Money she had taken from their accounts, hidden transactions, even emails between her and Thomas discussing a possible future after they drained David for everything he had. When presented in court, it was devastating. Emily sat in silence as the judge ruled in David's favor. Full custody. No amount of tears or pleas could change what had been decided. As they left the courtroom, she reached for his arm. "David, please, don't do this." He pulled away. "I already did." She sobbed, watching as he walked away with their son, the only thing in this world that still truly mattered to him. The final message weeks passed. David focused on rebuilding his life, ensuring his son's happiness, and watching as Emily's world crumbled. Thomas had vanished, his reputation ruined, his business gone. Emily, now truly alone, had no choice but to leave town. One evening, David received a final message from her. "Was I really nothing to you?" He stared at the screen for a long moment before replying. "You were everything. And then you became nothing." He hit send. And just like that, the past was finally behind him. The game was over, and David had won.